Hi all, welcome to a special CBCS seminar on Wednesday at 2 rather than our Tuesday at 11 seminar. Thanks to everybody for joining. And in this case, we have a special guest. I'm assuming you are calling in from the UK, but I'm not actually, I didn't ask you that beforehand. Yeah, calling in
Yeah.
from the UK where I imagine it's quite early in the morning. So thank you very much for getting up to chat with us. We have
You're
we have
welcome.
Joe Cook, the grants officer from the Rufford Foundation, as I've just learned how to say properly. And Joe has had a long career at ZSL before moving over to be the grants officer at the Rufford Foundation, and is going to sort of present to us on the small grants program with the Rufford Foundation. And I would just like to begin by expressing my deep thanks to Joe and the Rufford Foundation because I have a couple of students who have received grants through Rufford, and it's been really critical in their ability to do the work that they're doing. And I know we are extremely appreciative of that. So thank you very much, Joe, for that. And with that, I will hand over to you for the presentation.
That's great. Thank you very much. I would say good morning, everyone. I know it's not your morning. I'm still sort of getting the caffeine into me, so apologies if I look a little bleary-eyed. So the idea of this talk today is just to tell you about the foundation. We really want to get some more applications for grants, particularly for people working in Oceania, which may apply to some of you guys. But I can just tell you about the foundation, our grant process, and it could be that at some point in your career you do wish to apply for some money from Rufford and would like to sort of maximise your chances of success. So a little bit about who we are. The Rufford Foundation has supported many causes over time, not just nature conservation, but the focus of our small grants programme is nature conservation. In 20 years, we've given over £30 million through 6,000 grants to our grantees. So we have a high number of successful grantees, which is fantastic. And we're currently giving about £2 million a year in grants via this small grants programme. So there's a good chance of success. This is just a little summary of our strategy. So we contribute towards the coexistence of people and nature, obviously something that's at the forefront of our mind in everyday life. We want to fund and support people to conserve and better understand nature with the involvement of local communities around the world. And that aspect of the local communities is really key to us. We really want to have people on the ground in their own communities supporting conservation and people living there as much as possible. So some of our outcomes that we want to see is grantees are conserving nature in emerging economy countries. I'll come back to that. Grantees have enhanced capacities to work within the conservation related sector, and that you collaborate with experts and institutions to help achieve that purpose. And of course, we want to be effective and responsible. So I've just pulled this map off our website. We have so much information on our website. I really do encourage you just to go and have a look at some point. This map shows where all our projects are. And you can see by the colour sort of density and saturation that we have funded a lot more projects in certain countries compared to others. So lots in India, lots in Brazil, Argentina, etc. But we only fund projects in countries that are not listed as advanced economies by the IMF. Okay, so some countries we will not fund projects in. And there are still a few exceptions to that list as well. So we do have a list on our website which gives the eligible countries and which ones we cannot fund in. And there are some changes to that over time, given sort of political situations, etc. But if you have a look over sort of in the Oceania area, you can see that we have very few projects. And we're also trying to encourage work in the Caribbean as well. So we don't have any particular focus in terms of species or landscape or habitat. We literally will consider anything that's nature conservation based. I'm seeing lots more projects come through for fungi, which is really cool. Birds, invertebrates, anything can be eligible as long as it meets a certain sort of threat threshold, if you like. Now, I am a big cat person. If you sort of read my notes, you'll have got that by now. But I promise there's no bias. Even when I'm reviewing applications, you know, my eyes might sort of go, oh, tiger, but there's no sort of preference when we are looking at those grant proposals. We don't, doesn't have to be just a focus on a species. We will consider sort of a landscape project or even a project that's focusing on a particular threat, such as human-wildlife coexistence or something. So quick overview of the team. We are based in the UK, so our headquarters is in London. So most of us do a couple of days in London and then work the rest of the week from home, which is quite nice. Stuart is our CEO, so he has the ultimate decision over grant funding. We have Simon, who is our grants manager, myself as the grants officer. We have Emma, and she's come in with a new role of the monitoring, evaluation and learning officer. So now when our grantees submit their final reports from their project, Emma will be reviewing those and just sort of looking to see how effective the work actually was. And this is really important because we want to make sure that we are using our money wisely, but also provide our grantees with that option of learning how to write a good report, acknowledging perhaps what didn't go so well and what could be improved in the future. So it's really good to have her on board. We have Jane, who's our trust administrator and probably the most important person in the team. So if you do have any sort of correspondence with Rufford as an applicant or whatever, it will be Jane who does most of the corresponding with you. And so there's a lovely picture of her. You can picture her as you get your emails. We have Aisha, another new role as our communications officer. So she's working hard on getting the website up to date and also beginning to do some more work on our social media. We really want to sort of spread our reach, so that's Aisha's job. And then we have Monica, who is our finance officer, and she has one of the hardest roles, I think, having to verify various bank accounts all over the world, etc., which can be quite challenging at times. But again, we need to make sure our money is going to the right place. So that's the team. We all work very closely together and it's got a really nice sort of family feel. And I think that's quite important because the Rufford Foundation was started basically by a family. So it's nice that we've still got that sort of feel coming through and we're not too corporate. Okay, so I'm going to run through the different grant stages that we currently have. This has changed over the past couple of years. So previously there were 5 levels of grants that people could apply for. Now we've sort of simplified it and we just have the 4 different levels. So as you can see, they have different monetary value. The first Rufford small grant that you can apply for is worth up to £7,000. The second one is worth up to £8,000. We then have a booster grant, which is worth up to £12,000. And then the last one that you'd be eligible for would be the completion grant, which is worth up to £18,000. Now, each one does have slightly different sort of funding criteria. You can only apply for each next stage 12 months after the first one. I'm not sure I phrased that particularly well, but there has to be a 12-month gap between applications for the different stages. And of course, you do have to have completed the first project and submitted the final report, had that approved before we would let you apply for the next stage as well. And you have to work through those 4 stages. You can't just jump straight in at the booster grant. And of course, there is no guarantee that you would be successful at each stage. We do look at each stage individually. So it's quite simple to apply for a Rufford grant. One of the biggest differences perhaps through compared to other funders is we don't have a grant window, if you like. So applications are always open. We're always considering, we're always accepting or declining grants. So you can go onto our website and you can just hit the apply button there, which I've indicated with the blue arrow. And we have provided as much information as we think we can to help you in that application process. So if you are going to apply, it's really worth having a really good read through all of this before you even start writing your application, making sure that you are at least eligible, and then to see what sort of information it is that we'd like to see as you are submitting your application. So I'm going to go through some of the things that we look for in an application. Some of the things that really drive me up the wall and I get frustrated by. But the very most important thing is to make sure that you are eligible. It's really frustrating if someone completes a fantastic application, they've put lots of effort and time into it, and they're just not eligible, so we can't even consider them. So please check that as your first point of call. So we only give grants to early stage conservation, early stage career conservationists. Sorry, that got switched around. All right, so these tend to be students that are completing their MSc or their PhD, or who have graduated within the past 3 years. Now, there are some exceptions to that. We do acknowledge that in certain countries, access to higher education is very limited. So that's not a hard and fast rule, but generally that is where the majority of our first grants go to. As I said, the work has to be in an eligible country, and 99% of the time the applicant should also be from that country. Again, there may be some exceptions to that, but that's generally what we are looking for. The work tends to be for small scale or pilot projects, and the Rufford funding should account for between 50 and 100% of the funding. Now, generally, for the first and the second stage grants, the Rufford money is the 100% of the funding. For the booster grant, we do like applicants to have been trying to source some sort of co-funding. And then for the completion grant, we absolutely do want to see at least sort of 30–50% of co-funding. And that's because those projects tend to be a bit bigger, they have greater reach. And we also want to see our grantees making those connections with other funders, other organisations, so they can achieve more with their work. As I say, they have to have a nature conservation focus. If there is a focal species, we would not consider something that is marked as least concern on the IUCN Red List. However, if there is a national red list, which shows that there is a particular threat to that species in country, again, it is something that we would consider on a case-by-case basis. But basically, we are looking for something that is undeniably threatened to support. And as I said, you might not have a species focus. It may be something at a larger scale. You might be looking at a landscape-based project or something like that. So they are the very basic kind of eligibility rules, if you like. So if you are going to make an application, please read the guidelines. It sounds daft, but there's lots of instances where I think you didn't read the guidelines. Why have you done this? Please read all the questions. And we definitely encourage you to proofread your application or have someone else proofread it for you as well. Particularly if English is not your first language, it might be a good idea just have someone check and make sure that you've got the right points across. We only accept applications in English. We will reject them, unfortunately, if they're not in English. So if you need to use a translator, then please go ahead and do that. We do ask for a lot of information in the application, so please just take your time as you're completing it. You can save your progress and return to it, so you don't have to sit down and get it all done in one chunk. You can return to it. And I always think it's a good idea for you to write out your answers on a Word document before going to the application, just in case, you have a breakdown in your internet or something like that. There's a couple of sections on the application form that people have queried with us, and that is the personal plans for the future part. So we have so many applicants, it's very difficult for us to get to know you as people. And we just want to have a little bit of an idea of where you see your career heading. So, are you someone that definitely wants to be working in the field? Do you see research being combined with field work? Do you see lecturing as part of your future? It's just to give us a bit of an overview about what your intentions are as you move forward in your career. And we also ask you to provide social media links. Again, this is partly so that we can check and see that you are a real person and you're not just some bot that's, completed this application automatically. The kind of social media accounts that I particularly like to check are LinkedIn. So if you don't have a LinkedIn account, I really would recommend that, and perhaps ResearchGate as well as you do start publishing work. Obviously, we'll just look at Facebook, Twitter, whatever it is you want us to see. Don't worry, I'm not trawling through your holiday photos. That's not part of it at all. It is just to make sure that you are an actual real person. Okay, I can see my little kind of pictures here have moved a little bit, which is fine. One of my bugbears, though, is the budget. So within the application, of course, you have to provide a budget to show how you're going to spend the Rufford funds if you are successful. And we ask for that budget to be fully itemised. Okay, so I don't want you just to say, oh, I need camera traps, they're about £450. We actually want to see what the real life costs are. And I think people shy away from that a little bit because they're thinking, oh, well, exchange rates fluctuate. I'm not sure exactly how much I am going to spend, so I'll just give an estimation. We don't want to see that. We want to know that you have properly costed it, but we of course take into account that at the end of the project, there may have been some changes in costs, and that's fine, okay? So please give that detail. We want to see that you haven't just worked it out roughly in your head, which is what everyone does do at the start of planning a project. Please make sure that within your budget, you've accounted for all the activities that you've mentioned in your application. And please don't suddenly put something in your budget that's not mentioned anywhere else as well. Those have to really tie in so that we know you thought it through properly and you know what you're doing. In terms of overhead, we will accept some budget allocation for overheads, but no more than 10%, which I think is fairly standard for most funders. And then really importantly, if you are successful, as I say, that money has to go to a bank account. We will not transfer funds to a personal bank account. So you have to make sure you've got someone willing to manage that funds for you. So the majority of people have a university that they can manage the funds through, or sometimes it's an NGO or similar. Okay, so again, think very carefully about who could receive those funds on your behalf. And we would be obviously checking with them to make sure they're happy with that and that we don't have any sanctions on that particular country or bank. The other thing which is really frustrating or can be is the references. So for every application, we ask you to provide 3 references. So one of those has to be from within the country where you want to do your project. One of them has to be an international reference. And one of them, if you are still a student, one of them has to be from your current academic supervisor as well. And so when you make your application, you will give the 3 names of your referees, and they have to submit their reference within 12 weeks of you submitting your application. And unfortunately, we have a lot of applications that get rejected because those references are not received within those 12 weeks. And when that happens, once you're rejected, you cannot reapply for 12 months. So that's a real frustration for you guys as much as it is for us. So if you are going to apply, please check with your referees that they are happy to provide a reference for you. And also make sure that they are able to provide that reference within that 12-week period. So if they're about to disappear into, the forest of Borneo, it might not be a good time for them to provide a reference for you. So please make sure that you've got that sorted before you submit your application. Now, clearly you want to give your referee information about the project and why you're applying for the money. Do not be tempted to write the reference for them. Sometimes we do see 3 identical references come through for a particular applicant and you will get rejected straight away if we see that happening. So don't write it for them, but of course let them know what your project is all about. So these are some of the things that we're looking for when you are designing a good project and making a good application. Stating clear conservation outcomes. Now, that might sound really obvious, but a lot of our projects or our applications that come through are very research based, and that's fine. We understand that a lot of the time you have to carry out some research first and then you can apply that to some sort of conservation activity. But if you cannot show that link and how it can be applied, then we might be a little bit more hesitant. We don't want something that is pure research, particularly at those sort of 2nd and 3rd stage grants. Make sure that all your relevant stakeholders are involved. We really like to see that local and community aspect highlighted. We want to see those local people involved as much as possible, and also sort of making sure there's some sort of capacity sharing within the project. Make sure that you can measure the impact of your work. Make sure that you or your team have got all the necessary skills and experience to carry out the activities needed. So it's unlikely that you as an applicant would have all the skills, particularly if there's a survey element, an education element, an alternative livelihood element perhaps. So make sure you're bringing in other team members to support each aspect of your project. Do not be too ambitious or overstretch. Okay, definitely be realistic about what can be achieved. And as I said, make sure you provide a clear, detailed project. So that's just a very quick overview of what we like to see in a good project. We'll go into some of it in a little bit more detail. But just as a reminder that most Rufford funded projects last between 12 and 18 months. The kind of amounts of money that we're giving, that basically means you can't do an awful lot more than 12 to 18 months work anyway. And that really is a fairly short amount of time. It's perfect for a master's project. It's good to contribute towards your PhD, but you're not going to be able to change the world within that time. You're not going to be able to suddenly save a particular species within that time. Okay, so things like implementing those alternative livelihoods, establishing protected areas, etc., can take years. And that's why we say don't be too ambitious, but definitely think about the next stage. You might be able to start something going with your first grant, and then that can be built on within the second grant, etc. It is really key that even before you start, you actually identify what the problem is that you want to help, okay? And think about those questions that are really going to address that issue. So think super carefully about the outcomes, okay? What is it you want to achieve and how can you go about doing that? Think about constraints on when those activities can happen. So if you are carrying out survey work, if it's a migratory species, are they going to be there when you need to survey them, etc. As I said before, really think about all those different stakeholders that are involved. So people think about their university, for example, they might think about local councils, but are they thinking about the religious groups that might be relevant in that particular location? Really have a good sort of holistic approach to whatever work it is you propose to do. And when you're thinking about which methodologies to use, it could be that you're using a method that's tried and tested in lots of different places. You know that it will work. You might be trying something a little bit different. So, for example, we have a lot of projects which have used chili fences to deter elephants from crop raiding. We've got one applicant that wanted to try it on hippos, and we couldn't find any evidence to see if it had worked on hippos. We thought as a punt, we'll give it a go, we'll see what happens. But definitely try and find evidence of it being used before if you can, again, just to try and maximise the success. And we recommend you looking at the Conservation Evidence website to see where different techniques have been used and to see whether it is appropriate for what you want to achieve. Now, indicators is something that's quite interesting. Some people are brilliant at pinpointing a really good indicator for their work. But these are important because obviously you want to measure the impact of your activities and you want to know if they have been successful or not. So I see too many indicators that are really vague. They might say, oh, we want to see fewer conflict events, or we want to distribute education materials, or we want to reach, people in awareness activities. But that you can't measure that. Okay, you might have a reduction in conflict events of just one in a year. Is that successful? No. Okay, you have to actually have a target, think carefully about what you will deem to be successful, and to have something to aim for. Okay, so please don't be vague with your indicators. Again, we need to see that you've really thought it through right from the very start. Now, if things go wrong, and inevitably there will be at least one thing that goes wrong, that's fine. Okay, do not panic. That is life. That's life. Working in conservation, working in the field, something's not going to go to plan. Okay. What we do ask you to do, though, is to communicate with us when that happens. Okay. It might be that something has changed and you need to alter your budget. And generally, that's fine. If you tell us what's going on, what you need to do, then that's okay. What we don't like to see is at the end of your project, we get your final report and we suddenly see there's been a big change in either activities that have happened or big reallocation of budget. We want to know what's going on at the time. So that communication is really, really key. And it doesn't take long just to send us a quick email. And we do respond very quickly in those sorts of situations. So don't shy away from something having gone wrong. Part of the final evaluation report that we ask you to complete, we send you a template, and one of those sections is to actually say, which bits went wrong, what did you do to remedy it? And I should say that your final evaluation reports, they are all on the Rufford website. So for every grant, you have your own page, which you write. So it tells everyone about your project. And we upload any updates to that, and we upload the final evaluation report to that as well. And that's really important because someone else might be applying for a similar grant for similar work. So they might look at your page on the website and they can see what worked and what didn't work for you. And that might inform their project as well. So it's really important to have that transparency and you will not be shamed for it. So in the same theme, negative results are just as important as positive results. So again, it could be a method that didn't work. It might be you're undertaking a really intensive survey for a particular species or subspecies and you didn't find it. Well, that's just as important to know as finding it, etc. So don't be afraid to report negative results. And then the result sharing, again, this is a really important part of our application. How are you actually going to share the information that you gather during your project? And a lot of the time people focus on the academia side of things. So they talk about publishing in open access journals, which is great. We would encourage you to do that, of course. But also, how can you share that information with the local communities? How can you share it with the policymakers that can then potentially make that difference actually in situ? So think carefully about all those stakeholders and the most appropriate way of reaching them and sharing results with them. So is a workshop the best thing to do? Is it doing something online? Think about all those different methods. So people often ask us, what is the review process? Once you've submitted your application, what happens to it? And so once you submit your application, once those 3 references have been received and kind of attached to your application within our system, they then come to me. And I do, for the first and the second stage grants, I do the very first kind of eligibility check, if you like. So I see what it is you're doing. Are you currently a student or just finished? I look at the focal species or, the issue that you're tackling. I look at your references, make sure there's one international, one from your supervisor, etc. And I give it a very quick kind of overview in terms of what are you trying to achieve? Are you being realistic? Have you actually provided enough information for us to do a proper full evaluation of your proposal? If any of those is lacking, I may reach out to you and I may say, look, your budget is not detailed enough, please send me another one. Or it may be like, you forgot to give us an international reference, please send that in. So, I will give you one chance to give me all the information I need. However, if it's really lacking in a couple of places, then I might recommend reject straight away at that point. If that's the case, I pass it to Stuart, our CEO. He will have a look at my comments, he will look at the application, and then he will either agree, yes, at this point, we need to reject this application, or he might bat it back and say, actually, I would like to consider it further. Okay. So if you kind of successfully get through that first stage of screening, for the first and the second grants, we then pass it on to our external reviewers. So we then have 2 experts, and we actually use fauna and flora to do our external reviews. So we have them looking at your application, and they come back with their review and they will make a recommendation as to yes, it should be funded, no, it shouldn't, maybe. If there's a complete disparity between the 2 reviewers, so one says yes and one says no, we will then ask for a third review with them. And then all that information comes back to Simon, our grants manager. He will look at the application, he'll look at the comments from the reviewers, and at this stage we very often go back to the applicant and we ask for some additional information. It's very rare that we haven't sort of thought of some questions we'd like to have the answers to before making the final decision. So at that point, please do respond. Please give the information we're asking for. That comes back, Simon looks at your responses, and he will then make the recommendation to Stuart as to whether we should fund or not. And then Stuart, as I say, he kind of glances over everything and he makes that final call. Now, a lot of the time now we are able to give feedback if you are not successful. This hasn't happened in the past just because of the sheer volume and because the team was smaller. But now we are trying to provide that feedback as to why you may not have been successful. If you then make a subsequent application, please take on board the feedback that you were given, because if we see the same issues arising, then that doesn't go down well with us. We're like, we're trying to help you, please take it on board. We want you to be successful. Excuse me. Now, depending on the volume of applications we have at any one time and how many people are actually looking at it, it can take sort of between 3 and 5 months for an application to go through that full process. So please try and plan ahead your work as much as possible and take that reviewing time into account for your work. Okay, please don't apply if you're expecting to start your work in 2 months' time. That's just way too short to rely on us being able to get you an answer and to get the funds to you. Okay, so I said that's the process for the first and second stage grants. For the booster and the completion grants, we are actually now reviewing those in-house. So I will do the initial eligibility review and the first technical review. Simon will do the next technical review. And then the process after that is very similar. We'll go back to applicants with questions, etc. But that means that we can turn around the booster and the completion grant applications a bit quicker now. Which is helping both Fauna and Flora because it's taking some of their workload, but also helping you guys in getting a response sooner. So basically, it's not down to just one person saying yes or no. You will have at least 2 people having a look, and it could be up to 5 people, which hopefully is reassuring for you. Okay, so if you are successful, obviously congratulations. You will be notified of success. You will be sent a grant offer letter, which you will have to return. And we will also send you a banking information form. And that's where you have to provide the details of the bank account that will receive the money for you. As I say, those funds typically are sent to an NGO or a university. And if it's an organisation where we haven't sent funds before, we will be doing verifications over the phone just to make sure there's no fraudulent activity going on. So definitely be prepared for that to happen as well. So I'm just very quickly going to go through an example of someone that went through the full cycle of Rufford small grants. As I say, the grant system has changed slightly. So when Angela started, she actually was able to apply for up to 5 grants, which she did. So now you can only go up to 4 grants. And as you can see, that time period was 13 years. So we do say that we fund early career conservationists, but obviously, as you're going through that grant cycle, you're getting more and more experience. So if someone applied for the first grant and they already had like 15 years conservation experience, we probably wouldn't consider them. We want to start supporting you at the early stage of your career. So you can find all this information on our website, but I've broken it down for you. So Angela was looking at night monkeys in Colombia. So a particular threat to these guys was they're being hunted and traded for malaria research. So obviously this is something that Angela wanted to address. So she started doing awareness activities with communities, wanted young people and hunters to actually get involved in censusing and surveying, the different wildlife that was around them. She started sending reports to the Colombian park system, and she established Fundación Entropica to engage the key stakeholders. So Entropica is still running, and we are actually supporting them with an organisational grant as well. So for her second grant, she actually expanded her work across the border to Peru. So wanted to work with teams over there as well to look at wildlife densities on the border. They collaborated in actioning a hunting and trapping ban, and they reported to key authorities in both countries. And that cross-border work is so important for so many different species, but can be quite hard to achieve. So this was really key part of her work. As well as that, she established a sort of a study plot as well for further research. So the booster grant, this was obviously worth a little bit more money, so she could achieve a bit more as well. They managed to get a permit that was granted for capturing night monkeys cancelled. Established an alliance with Entropica and Indigenous Association to conduct assessments. So really good to have those Indigenous peoples included. Created a database on the sustainability of hunting of the 10 most threatened vertebrates, and also start collaborating with local police, which saw the confiscation of night monkeys as well from a Peruvian trader. So you can see there's lots of different approaches that Angela has taken with her work here. Second booster grant, again, worth a little bit more, able to do a bit more. Lots of collaboration with the IUCN SSC Primate Specialist Group, and that led to a changing of threat status for one particular species. Supporting local communities isn't just about making sure they're not hunting and things like that. It's making sure they've got a good a good standard of living. So they were looking at making sure there was drinking water available for local communities as well. Again, building on this database for large vertebrates in that particular area, and lots of additional educational work through the foundation to make sure that communities are collaborating and are involved in all the conservation work. And then her completion grant, which was in 2017, 2 further tourism associations were established. Continuing the field work and those surveys, obviously that's something that should be ongoing, the survey work at least, just to see how those populations are changing over time. And again, looking at a tri-border workshop on this occasion, Colombia, Peru and Brazil, which was focused on combating wildlife trafficking. So this is someone that started fairly small, but with a clear idea about what they wanted to do, and looked at all those different aspects that they could approach in order to protect this particular species. So as I said, everyone gets their own webpage on our website with their project. And we're also doing some showcases now, which is really lovely to see actually. So we're picking out particular people and projects and just doing a little bit of a focus on them. So our most recent one that you can find on our website is from someone that's working in Guatemala with those very cute little lizards. I just love the backpack monitoring thing on him. It's really cute. So have a look at the website and hopefully be inspired. Okay, so if you are successful in achieving the grant, whether it's with Rufford or whether it's with, a different funder, it's really important that you keep your funders happy, and not just because you might want to have more money from them in the future. So please say thank you for their support. It sounds daft, but so many people actually don't acknowledge that, and that has to be done. Always read the reporting guidelines, which will change according to each funder. But please submit your reports on time. Again, that's really important. If for some reason you're not going to be able to communicate, let us know. Perhaps there's been a delay in doing some analysis, or perhaps you're literally stuck with, you just can't get it done in time. Let us know what is going on. Publicise the funder support, so it's quite easy to whack a logo on any educational materials. Lots of people seem to like producing t-shirts as part of their project. Contact your funders, as I say, if activities or costs need to change. Please keep good records and receipts. Now, like any charity, we are audited every year. We have to make sure that we can show where the money is going. And that does mean that we could potentially need to ask you to show your receipts. It doesn't happen often, but it could happen. So please keep your receipts for a minimum of 5 years, I would say. You're going to end up with folders and, all sorts with ratty bits of paper in them. We need those receipts. Share news and keep in regular contact. So we currently only require a final report. We are probably going to bring in an interim report as well. But just the odd email every so often, maybe with a couple of photos showing your activities. It's really nice for us to start to build that connection with you, and just to see how your work is going is really cool. And then when your project is complete, don't be afraid to ask for further funding. Please apply for that next stage grant. We want to support people through their career as much as possible. And we want to see people going through that whole cycle of the first grant right through to the completion grant. So this is my last slide. Once you have been a successful Rufford grantee, that would make you eligible to attend one of our learning events. So we host these in different countries each year. We're hoping to do at least 3 a year. We've had a little bit of a pause just because of changing in staff. But these are basically workshops that are organised by grantees. We look at what the knowledge gaps are, what the learning need is in that particular country, to inform what kind of workshops we provide. So it might be people want to know more about key biodiversity areas. They might want to know about communicating conservation. Could be anything. So we tailor the workshops to that particular cohort. It gives you an opportunity to network with different Rufford grantees within the area. We would link up with different NGOs, we'd have guest speakers come in, etc. And it's just a really nice opportunity for us to provide some more support, and for you guys to have that support from peers as well. And these are fully funded by Rufford, so attendees have all costs covered, including travel to get there. So yeah, you would be eligible to attend one of those if it was happening in your country. So it's something to look out for. Again, you can find out information about our learning events on our website. So do take a look and see what it is we have been up to. Okay, so that's everything I have in terms of my actual presentation. However, I'd be very happy to answer any questions that you might have. I don't know if you've got the chat function or how you would like to do this, but please do fire away if you've got anything.
Thank you very much, Joe. Wonderful presentation. Again, I know that there are a lot of students on here. We could actually have a hand wave from students or anybody who has received a Rufford grant before, because I can see at
Oh,
least
that'd be great. I'd love to know if there's
3.
someone out there.
Anybody want to pop up a hand if you have received any money from Rufford before, so we can indicate, because there might also be ways for folks to
Oh,
um,
yay.
yeah. I know there's at
Awesome.
least one more out there. Yeah, there's a couple
If
more
someone could
maybe.
note down those names for me and let me know, that would be great. And then I can have a little bit of a find out what it is you did.
Yeah, excellent. And yeah, then we can raise hands for questions. Chris, do you have a question, or is that that's for the funding scheme? That's great. Maybe I'll start with a question while people are formulating their questions. I was
Sure.
just curious. We have a lot of international students at UQ in
Yeah.
general and CBCS in particular, and I'm curious the stipulations around people from a country working in the country if they're studying and mostly based someplace else, right?
Yeah.
So how on the ground, like if the field work is being done in Colombia by a Colombian, but they're going to school here at UQ, is that
Yeah.
an issue
That's
to send
not,
the money through
no.
UQ? Okay.
No, that's not an issue at all. We see so many people that are actually, doing their PhD or their masters in a different country. It is the field work, the actual, project work that has to be in that other country. So that's not an issue. I mentioned that we tend to like the applicants to be from the country that they're doing the field work in. We have so many applications from, UK students, US students, etc., that want to work in Bolivia or Madagascar. And we have to make sure that there's a true intent as to why they want to be working there and that they are committed to work in that country, or perhaps they've got some connection to that country already. What we don't want is to see people just kind of, I don't know, almost like tourism,
Yeah.
going to a place because they fancy going to the jungle and doing their work there. So that's why actually in terms of being eligible, those people that are from the UK, from the US, from those sort of Western countries, if you like, tend not to be eligible, but there are again some exceptions to that. So, but yeah, in terms of actually where you're studying, that's not a concern at all.
Okay. And we have a question from Maria K about
Mhm.
whether or not, I guess it's whether you can have co-applicants, like multiple students for a single grant.
So every grant has to go to one particular individual. We have had instances of multiple individuals applying for a different element of the work.
Mhm.
We would not be funding exactly the same project, exactly the same activities with multiple people. So that's where you just need to get a little bit creative about what you're doing. And if we do realise that actually you are all contributing to a certain project, it would be a discussion that we would have.
And you're welcome to just put a hand up and you can ask your question out loud, or you can throw it into the chat there. I had another one, which was just how long is the normal wait time between finishing one grant and applying for another? Is there some benefit to continuity where people are applying before they finish the first grant so that the money is just sort of flowing, or is they have to finish, they put in the final report and then they.
Yeah, that's it. They absolutely have to finish. So they're not even able to apply on our system unless the final report has been received and has been signed off.
Mm.
So we do see a fairly quick succession of grants coming through. So there might be, a gap of maybe 6 months between the grants, or it can be several years actually as well. This was a discussion we had just yesterday as to, are we going to put a time limit on how long we can wait for that subsequent application? And I think we're kind of thinking if someone has successfully completed a project and then they apply about 5 years later for another one, we would still consider it, but we'd want to know, what has caused that time delay. Is it because they had funding from different source? Perhaps they were moving roles or something. But yeah, if it gets beyond a 5 year gap, we would be questioning it a little bit. But yeah, you have to have a minimum of 12 months between the applications. But as most projects take sort of 12 to 18 months anyway, that kind of minimum issue doesn't really arise, to be perfectly honest. But yeah, you can't apply until your final report has been submitted and approved.
We have a question from the room.
Excellent.
Hi, Joe. Thank you so much for the presentation.
You're welcome.
So I have a question regarding so the stage one and the stage two grants, do they have to be connected? For example, I'm also a Rufford grantee. I got a grant in 20, and that time I was working on cloud developers, but now I'm doing a PhD, and then my questions and then my whole project can be different. So I was thinking whether with different projects, what are the chances of getting funding from Rufford?
Cool, that's a great question, and it is something we kind of have some guidelines for. We probably don't share them, but we acknowledge that people very often will do their first project that's related to one thing, and then for whatever reason decide to actually take a different direction or have a different focus. We do allow for there to be a change in that focus between the first and the second one. So in your case, absolutely, please feel free to apply for an additional grant, even if it's not focusing on clouded leopards. After that, however, we do want to see that continuity and that connection. Okay, so you can only kind of change your focus once. After that, it all does have to be connected. I hope that helps.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Also great that you're showing your lack of bias towards big cats by allowing him to move on.
Yeah, well, cloudies are very cool though. Why would you not want to do them anymore?
Yeah, excellent. Other questions? I have one more just about the general success rate and number of applicants that you get every year. This is also really good information for us, by the way. We do run a small grant scheme through CBCS. It's only about $20,000 that we do every year, and 5 or 6 or 7 projects that get up on that. But it's very interesting to me to hear about the details of how you do this on a bigger scale. So what does the success rate tend to look like, and how many applicants are you weeding through every year?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I'm going to sort of break it down a little bit smaller actually, in terms of thinking about how many applications I look at sort of over a 2-week period, if you like. So we are limited as to how many we send out for external review. So I would only be sending about 20 through to external review over a 2-week period, so about 10 a week. I will be rejecting more than that. So I would be rejecting sort of up to 30 over a 2-week period. So straight away, there's quite a bias towards not being successful. In terms of how many are then successful following that external review, gosh, I'd imagine about 60% are successful. Yeah, it tends to be a high success rate for those first and those second grants than it is for the booster and the completion. I think because we're looking for so much more with those particular subsequent grants as well. But it's a huge volume that we are getting through, and that unfortunately is why it takes us so long to actually review them all, and also why we don't have that sort of great connection with our grantees that we'd love to have, just because there's so many of them. So in terms of volume, we are churning through a lot of applications. And I have to say, as a grants officer, it's brilliant for me to see all these applications coming in from across the world. I'm learning about so many different species that I've never even heard of. It's fantastic. But to see that passion and that enthusiasm from these young people, it's great and fantastic that we're able to support at least a proportion of them in their work. So yeah, unfortunately, more people are unsuccessful than successful, but again, that's the nature of the sort of industry, isn't it? You will get far more rejections as you're applying for funding than you will successful responses, unfortunately.
Excellent. Any other questions? Any more in the room there, Kate?
Yeah, one more question. So, in the criteria you mentioned that local communities will have to be involved. So I was wondering from Rufford whether you prioritize projects that are more focused on conservation or research, or you don't have any requirements.
So conservation is absolutely our key focus. We do want to see that really brought into your project. Obviously, a lot of them have a research component as well, but if we can't see the conservation applications of that, then we would sort of be more reserved about funding them. And yeah, we just want to see some sort of connection with communities as part of that. We know that that's probably easier the further along the grant cycle you go. And a lot of the time, particularly those first grants, you are just establishing baseline data, for example. You might be, working out what the threats to a particular species are, and it's only in the subsequent work that you can start bringing in these other elements. But yeah, definitely think about the conservation as opposed to a pure research-based project.
Thank you.
Excellent. I think that brings us up to about our time and allow people a moment to get to the next meeting or the next appointment. But please join me in thanking Joe again. Thank you, Joe. That was awesome, really helpful. And
You're
we will
welcome. Hopefully you
definitely,
noted down my email address. So if you do have questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to help.
yeah, absolutely. And I think I did capture a number of people who raised their hand, and I'm happy to work with Kate to make sure we got everybody and send the names to you of the folks that we have here.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. Thank you so much, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for taking the time. Cheers.
Bye.